Mid-December 1944. In the Ardennes forest, the war begins not with gunfire, but with engines. Starters grind against frozen resistance. Batteries strain. Diesel thickened by cold hesitates before catching. In the darkness beneath tall pines, German vehicles wake one by one, coughing white breath into the fog. This is how the offensive opens, not as a charge, but as a mechanical act starting machines in winter. An armoured column takes shape along a narrow forest road. Tanks, half-tracks, fuel trucks, and command vehicles stand nose to tail, their silhouettes blurred by mist. The plan depends on this moment. Surprise, fog, and speed are meant to compensate for what Germany no longer has: fuel, reserves, time. If the column moves smoothly, the road will carry it west before the enemy understands what is happening. If it hesitates, there is no space to recover. At the edge of the road, a maintenance crew finishes its work. Their task is ordinary, final checks made countless times before. But nothing about the setting is ordinary. It is dark, bitterly cold, and every delay carries consequence. Officers are watching the clock. Drivers want to move. The men work quickly, fingers stiff inside gloves, tools harder to feel than to see. Routine becomes compressed by urgency. Somewhere in this process, something small is missed. A fitting is not fully tightened. A filter does not seat as cleanly as it should. A coolant mix is slightly wrong for the temperature. Track tension is left just shy of ideal. Each of these faults, alone, seems harmless. Machines often tolerate worse. And in the quiet before movement, nothing appears wrong. The column rolls forward. The first kilometers pass without incident. Then heat builds where it should not. Vibration increases. Power falters. What was insignificant at rest becomes decisive under load. A lead vehicle begins to struggle, subtly at first, then unmistakably. The driver eases off, tries to nurse it along, but the road offers no mercy. The machine slows. Then it stops. Behind it, brakes are applied. Spacing collapses. Engines idle. In mechanized war, rhythm is not convenience, it is strategy. When the rhythm breaks, everything behind it feels the shock. Radios crackle with questions that have no quick answers. The forest absorbs the sound, indifferent. The breakthrough has not yet met the enemy. No shots have been fired. And yet, in the cold darkness of the Ardennes, momentum has already begun to leak away, lost not to resistance, but to a minute of neglected attention. The German offensive in the Ardennes is built around a narrow window of possibility. Surprise must last just long enough to achieve the impossible, to seize bridges intact, capture road hubs, and push armoured columns deep into Allied rear areas before resistance can organise. It is not a plan designed for resilience. It is a plan designed for speed, and speed alone. The geography offers little forgiveness. The Ardennes is a region of thick forest and steep valleys where movement funnels onto a small number of hard-surfaced roads. There are few alternatives, and in winter, every deviation carries a cost measured in hours, fuel, and mechanical strain. Snow hides ditches. Mud clings to tracks. Detours that might work in summer become traps in December. Once committed to a road, a column is effectively married to it. Fuel scarcity turns every decision into a gamble. Germany no longer possesses the reserves to absorb inefficiency. A stalled vehicle does not simply stop itself, it consumes fuel while idling, blocks those behind it, and forces others to burn precious litres waiting in place. In such conditions, delay multiplies. What begins as a mechanical problem becomes a logistical one, then a tactical one, and finally a strategic liability. The plan assumes that armoured spearheads will move as a single organism. Tanks, half-tracks, engineers, and supply vehicles are meant to advance in tight coordination, striking hard and fast before the enemy can respond. This cohesion is not a luxury, it is the core of the design. If the spearhead fractures, its power dissipates. Concentration gives the Germans their only chance. Dispersion guarantees failure. Weather is expected to complete the equation. German planners count on fog and low cloud to ground Allied aircraft, removing the greatest external threat to movement. The sky itself is treated as an ally, unreliable but indispensable. Under this assumption, roads become lifelines and time becomes the currency of survival. In this design, minutes matter more than kilometers. A town reached an hour late may as well be a town never reached at all. A bridge delayed is a bridge destroyed. The offensive does not need to be stopped everywhere, it only needs to be slowed in one place. And if one spearhead loses tempo, the entire plan begins to unravel, quietly at first, then all at once. At the head of the column, a vehicle begins to misbehave. The change is not dramatic. A temperature needle climbs higher than it should. Power arrives unevenly. Steering grows heavy, then uncertain. To an experienced crew, these are warning signs, subtle messages from a machine under stress. In the cold of the Ardennes, such signals are easy to dismiss, or at least postpone. The driver keeps moving. Stopping on a forest road is dangerous, almost taboo. The lane is narrow, the shoulders soft, the trees close. To halt is to invite congestion, to expose the column's vulnerability before the breakthrough has even revealed itself. So the driver nurses the machine forward, easing the throttle, listening for changes in pitch and vibration, hoping the problem will remain contained for just a few more kilometers. It does not. The engine coughs, then loses its argument with physics. Power fades. The vehicle rolls to a halt without drama or noise, as if making a decision of its own. There is no explosion, no visible damage, only a silence that should not exist at the tip of an armored advance. The machine refuses to negotiate. Behind it, brakes are applied in sequence. Spacing collapses. Vehicles draw closer than doctrine allows, their exhaust hanging low in the fog. Radios crackle with questions at first, requests for clarification, for estimates, then with orders sharpened by impatience. No one wants to say the word stopped, but everyone understands its meaning. Engineers and mechanics move forward through the line. They kneel in frozen mud and frost, tools clumsy in numbed hands. Hatches are opened. Steam escapes briefly into the air. Diagnosis is made by touch as much as by sight, because light is scarce and time is scarcer. Every minute spent here is a minute stolen from the plan. The timetable begins to slip. At first by moments, then by tens of minutes. Vehicles idle, burning fuel without advancing. The delay spreads backward through the column, invisible at the front but growing heavier with distance. Slipping becomes contagious. This is the moment when shock crystallizes. The Ardennes is not wide enough to absorb delay. On these roads, one failure does not remain singular. It multiplies, turning a small fault into a blocked road and a blocked road into a strategic problem the offensive was never designed to solve. By late 1944, German leadership no longer believes in victory as it once did. What remains is a narrower conviction that a single, decisive blow in the West might fracture Allied unity and force negotiation. The Ardennes offensive is conceived not as a campaign of attrition, but as a shock, something sudden enough to rewrite political reality before military reality can catch up. The vision draws deliberately on memory. In staff rooms and briefing tents, 1940 still lingers as proof of concept. Forests once crossed swiftly, enemy lines once bypassed, capitals once stunned into paralysis. The Ardennes becomes a stage on which history might repeat itself. Swift thrusts through wooded terrain. Allied forces surprised, confused, reacting too late. The image is powerful precisely because it is familiar. Many commanders understand how different the circumstances now are. The enemy is stronger, better supplied, and hardened by years of war. German resources are depleted. Fuel is rationed. Air superiority no longer belongs to them. Yet the narrative of one bold stroke proves irresistible. It offers clarity where reality offers only erosion. Politically and psychologically, motion feels preferable to admission. In this belief system, machines take on a symbolic role. Tanks and trucks are treated not merely as tools, but as answers. Speed is expected to replace manpower. Shock is expected to replace supply. Armor becomes the means by which the imbalance of resources might be temporarily ignored. If the spearheads move fast enough, the gaps behind them will not matter, at least not yet. This logic demands precision. Timetables are drawn tight, coordination layered thinly but carefully. Units are assigned tasks that depend on others succeeding on time, in sequence, without interruption. It is an architecture built for momentum, not friction. Yet the system meant to execute it is already strained. Vehicles are worn. Crews are tired. Maintenance schedules have been compressed for months, sometimes years. What sustains the plan is not confidence in logistics, but belief in narrative. The offensive becomes a psychological necessity. A nation under pressure clings to movement as evidence that it still controls events. To stop would be to acknowledge limits. To advance, even dangerously, is to assert agency. In this way, belief substitutes for margin. Arrogance enters quietly, without proclamation. It appears as assumption. That engines will start. That columns will move. That machines will behave as they did in ideal conditions, not in freezing forests under impossible schedules. No one says it aloud, but it is present in every calculation that the mechanical foundation of the offensive will hold, because it must. This is the hidden wager. The plan does not merely risk men and fuel, it risks faith in machinery itself. Under the worst conditions imaginable, the offensive assumes near-perfect performance from systems already pushed beyond comfort. And as the columns inch forward into the fog, that assumption remains untested, waiting, silently, for winter to answer it. In the Ardennes, winter is not a backdrop. It is an active participant. Cold thickens oil until engines resist their own movement. Batteries lose strength overnight, sometimes failing without warning. Metal contracts. Seals that held in autumn begin to leak in December. Machines designed to operate within tolerances find those tolerances narrowed by temperature alone. Rubber hardens in the cold, losing flexibility when it is needed most. Hydraulic systems respond slowly, if at all, their fluid sluggish under frost. Engines demand careful warming, time to build heat evenly, to let metal expand without stress. But combat schedules rarely allow patience. Columns are ordered to move when clocks demand it, not when machines are ready. On the roads and shoulders, winter exerts its own pressure. Snow conceals ruts and soft ground. Mud clings to tracks and wheels, adding weight and resistance with every rotation. Track pins and suspension components grind under contamination they were never meant to endure continuously. Ice turns braking into guesswork, where stopping distances are measured not in meters, but in hope. In these conditions, a maintenance oversight stops being small. A loose fitting that might hold under mild weather begins to seep. A marginal coolant mix becomes a liability. A filter not perfectly seated allows contamination that thickened fuel can no longer push past. Winter magnifies every weakness, turning tolerance into vulnerability. Fuel itself becomes a variable. Quality varies. Delivery is uneven. Cold causes diesel to gel, narrowing passages and slowing feed. A partially clogged line may function on paper, but in sub-zero air it becomes a choke point. One vehicle falters. Another idles while waiting. Soon an entire platoon is immobilized, not by enemy action, but by chemistry and temperature. Recovery, when failure occurs, is a battle of its own. Towing a disabled vehicle on icy roads is slow and dangerous. Traction is uncertain. Braking risks collisions. Off-road recovery risks burying both vehicles in mud beneath the snow. Crews work exposed, hands numb, tools difficult to grip. Time stretches. Fuel drains. What should be a temporary pause becomes a fixed obstacle. The truth is unglamorous and inescapable. Winter turns minor faults into operational disasters. It strips away the illusion that machinery is neutral or obedient. In the Ardennes, every vehicle carries an invisible second enemy beneath its armor, cold, persistent, and impartial. And as the columns push forward, they are not only racing the clock and the enemy. They are racing the season itself, one that has no interest in their plans. Our breakdowns are expected to be rare and quickly resolved. Traffic jams are treated as theoretical problems, not likely events. Repairs are assumed to occur on the move or not at all. The schedule leaves no space for waiting because waiting consumes fuel and exposes weakness. On Ardennes roads, this assumption is dangerous. A single disabled vehicle on a narrow lane can immobilize dozens behind it. There is often no room to pass, no shoulder firm enough to risk bypassing. The forest presses in. What should be a localized problem becomes a linear one, stretching backward through the column. Movement ceases not gradually, but suddenly. The Germans gamble that speed will protect them. That by moving fast, they will remain unseen, unengaged, and therefore unimpeded. Instead, speed reveals their dependence on continuity. The faster the column is meant to move, the less interruption it can tolerate. Momentum becomes brittle. When it breaks completely. The tiny maintenance slip is only the spark. A loose fitting, a clogged line, an imperfect adjustment, none of these are extraordinary in wartime. The true vulnerability lies elsewhere. It lies in the fact that the entire timetable is flammable. One spark is enough because everything around it is dry. As delays accumulate, the schedule begins to consume itself. Units arrive late to objectives that no longer exist in the same form. Bridges are missed by minutes. Fuel is burned while waiting rather than advancing. Commanders begin revising orders in response to problems the plan never acknowledged as likely. This is the hinge on which the offensive turns. Success depends on perfection, not just bravery or skill, but flawless execution under impossible conditions. And perfection in industrial war is the rarest fuel of all. Once it is spent, nothing in reserve can replace it. The mechanics work where the column has stalled, in darkness broken only by hooded lamps and the faint glow of exhaust heat. Their hands are numb, fingers stiff inside gloves that no longer insulate properly. Tools slip. Bolts resist. Engine steam as hatches are opened, warm air escaping briefly into the cold before vanishing into fog. There is no shelter here, only urgency. Officers stand close, not interfering, but watching the clock. Minutes are counted like ammunition. Every repair is a fight for tempo, because tempo is the only protection the plan has left. Orders are restrained, but the pressure is unmistakable. The question is not whether the machine can be fixed, but how long the column can afford to wait while it is. Across the radio net, tension rises. Reports from the front demand movement. Messages from the rear describe congestion growing heavier by the minute. The language becomes sharper, less patient. Metal does not respond to tone, and the reality of the situation begins to collide with the expectation that orders alone can restore motion. Behind the stalled vehicle, drivers grow restless. Spacing collapses as vehicles inch forward, trying to close gaps that no longer exist. Exhaust thickens the fog, turning the road into a narrow tunnel of sound and vibration. Even without clear visibility, congestion becomes obvious. The column has lost its shape. The battalion begins to improvise. Orders are given to push the disabled vehicle off the road, to tow it forward, to find a way around through fields or forest edges. Each option carries risk. Pushing risks blocking the lane entirely. Towing strains recovery vehicles already operating near their limits. Bypassing promises speed, but only in theory. The fields are softer than they appear. Snow hides mud, and mud hides ditches. Vehicles leaving the road sink or slide, their weight too much for ground never meant to carry armor. One detour creates another breakdown. Another recovery effort is required. Improvisation multiplies friction rather than reducing it. Time continues to pass. Fuel is burned without progress. Radios remain active, but solutions grow thinner. What should have been a brief pause becomes an extended engagement with physics. The breakthrough, conceived as a contest of maneuver, is now wrestling with mass, temperature, and terrain. This is the beginning of the real struggle. The column is not yet fighting Americans in force. It is fighting the limits of its own logistics and the indifference of winter. And as the mechanics continue their work in the cold, the offensive is already expending the resource it cannot replace: time. The Ardennes road network allows little flexibility. Forests press close to narrow lanes, forcing columns into single-file movement for kilometers at a time. There is no room for overtaking, no parallel routes waiting as relief. When one vehicle stops, the effect is immediate and mechanical. Motion halts not by degrees, but in sequence. Behind the armor, fuel trucks and ammunition carriers are caught in the same line. They cannot pass the tanks they are meant to support. The very vehicles that sustain the advance are immobilized by it. Engines idle. Consumption continues. Supplies meant for tomorrow are burned today simply by waiting. Commanders are forced into a choice that the plan never intended them to make. Do they push resources forward to protect the column's front, or do they safeguard the lifeline that keeps it alive? Armor without fuel is static. Supply without movement is irrelevant. Every decision sacrifices something essential, and none restore momentum. Units scheduled to strike at dawn begin arriving late. Objectives that were meant to be seized in darkness are now approached in growing light. Defenders, once expected to be surprised, have time to react. Foxholes deepen. Roadblocks are reinforced. What should have been a sudden blow becomes a series of contested approaches. In this environment, small American roadblocks acquire disproportionate power. They are rarely strong in themselves. A few engineers, an anti-tank gun, some infantry in prepared positions. Their effectiveness comes from timing. Each minute they delay the Germans allows more defenders to arrive behind them. Resistance multiplies not through firepower, but through accumulated time. Frustration builds within the German ranks. Radios carry complaints, explanations, and quiet accusations. Someone must be responsible. A crew, a mechanic, a commander. But the problem resists personalization. The cause is structural. A system built without margin is now encountering reality, and reality is refusing to hurry. The irony sharpens with every passing hour. The breakthrough is being crippled not by overwhelming enemy action, but by its own congestion. Much of this struggle unfolds unseen by the Allies. There is no dramatic clash to announce failure, only columns stalled in forests, burning fuel and daylight. The enemy does not need to create the traffic jam. It already exists. And as German units inch forward into resistance that grows stronger by the minute, the offensive begins to feel less like a surprise attack and more like a slow disclosure of limits the plan was never designed to acknowledge. As German movement slows, information begins to accumulate on the Allied side. Isolated units, initially unsure of what they are facing, start filing reports, sounds of engines here, armored sightings there. Individually, these fragments mean little. Together, they begin to trace a pattern. The axis of advance emerges not from intelligence brilliance, but from time granted. Artillery officers and engineers study maps with renewed purpose. They identify the places where pressure will matter most, bridges that cannot be easily replaced, towns where roads converge, bends where columns must slow and expose themselves. These are not new insights. What is new is the opportunity to act on them before the Germans arrive in force. The fog that once sheltered the advancing columns now shelters the defenders as well. American units reposition under its cover, moving laterally without air observation, shifting guns and men into more effective alignment. The same weather that delayed Allied air power now delays German decision-making, blurring their awareness of what resistance is forming ahead. When German units finally make contact, the resistance feels heavier than expected. Not because the enemy is stronger, but because the enemy is prepared. Roadblocks are in place where none were anticipated. Artillery fires arrive sooner. Infantry holds ground that should have been empty. The timetable has been exposed. That tiny slip has matured into a strategic event. What began as a mechanical problem has produced a commodity more valuable than any weapon: time. With it, the Allies turn reaction into anticipation. They do not need to stop the offensive everywhere, only to shape it. Somewhere along a frozen road, an American officer pauses and listens. Through the fog comes the distant rumble of engines. It is steady, but not urgent. It lacks the speed the legends suggest. In that sound, he hears not just movement, but delay. He understands, instinctively, that the enemy is advancing more slowly than planned. From this moment, the struggle changes character. The Germans are no longer racing into surprise. They are advancing into preparation. Their schedule is unready for what waits ahead, and it will not be granted the time it needs to adjust. The key junctions are still ahead. The bridges that matter, the crossings over rivers and streams that cannot be easily replaced, remain intact on maps, but not in time. German units approach them later than planned, their schedules already eroded by delays that seemed manageable when they began. Now, those minutes have weight. American engineers work quickly. Charges are set. Fuses are prepared. Where destruction is not possible, crossings are fortified, guarded by infantry and covered by fire. Bridges that might have been taken in darkness are now defended in daylight. Surprise, once assumed, has expired. Around towns and ridge lines, defensive lines begin to stiffen. Units that were meant to be scattered and reactive are now layered and alert. Every hour allows more American soldiers to arrive, some by design, others by instinct, drawn toward the sound of movement and resistance. Positions deepen. Fields of fire are cleared. What should have been gaps are now obstacles. Meanwhile, German fuel consumption rises without progress. Vehicles idle in traffic jams, engines running to prevent freezing, burning fuel without advancing a meter. Each pause consumes what the offensive can least afford to lose. Calculations made under optimistic assumptions no longer apply. The arithmetic turns hostile. Here, the offensive's internal contradiction becomes visible. It requires speed to conserve fuel, yet it burns fuel while waiting for speed. The faster it was meant to move, the more damaging each delay becomes. Momentum, once broken, cannot be restarted without cost, and the cost is rising by the hour. This is the turning point, though it does not announce itself with a single battle or dramatic collapse. It arrives quietly, as a condition. The loss of tempo becomes permanent. From this moment, every advance is made against resistance that grows faster than the Germans can overcome it. Time is no longer an ally to be managed. It is an adversary. The moral hinge sharpens here. The maintenance slip did not, by itself, cause defeat. It exposed something more fundamental. The offensive was built with almost no margin. It depended on ideal execution from a system already strained by years of war. When that system faltered, even slightly, the plan had nowhere to absorb the shock. As the bridges disappear behind smoke or steel reinforcement, the Germans press on, but now under altered conditions. The question is no longer whether they can advance quickly enough. It is whether they can advance at all before the sky itself begins to rejoin the fight. For days, low cloud and fog have shaped the battle as much as any commander. Then, gradually, the weather begins to change. Ceilings lift. Visibility improves. The sky, absent but never neutral, returns to the war. With it comes Allied air power, operating first cautiously, then with growing confidence as conditions allow. What had been hidden becomes visible. Congested roads reveal themselves as dark lines cut through pale winter ground. Stalled columns, once protected by fog, are now exposed. From above, movement and stillness are equally revealing. A vehicle that does not move is no longer just a problem, it is a coordinate. German vehicles are already strained by cold, wear, and delay. Now they are punished from the air. Fighter bombers appear in quick arcs, striking where columns are densest and escape is least possible. Movement by day becomes hazardous. Movement by night remains slow and disorganized. The window for safe motion narrows until it nearly closes. German commanders respond by ordering dispersion. Vehicles are spread out where possible, pushed into cover, concealed among trees and buildings. But dispersion carries a cost. It reduces concentration. It weakens the striking power of armored units designed to act together. What protects against bombs also dissolves the offensive's ability to punch through resistance. Anti-aircraft fire offers limited comfort. Guns are too few, ammunition constrained, crews fatigued. A column may protect itself at one bend in the road, but the sky is wide and threats arrive from multiple directions. Choke points remain vulnerable. Bridges, intersections, and traffic jams attract attention no matter how carefully they are defended. The climax unfolds without a single decisive engagement. It is systematic. Air attacks slow movement. Artillery, guided by improved observation, strikes roads and assembly areas. Each delay increases exposure. Each exposure invites further attack. Delay is converted into destruction by a process that no individual action can interrupt. Fuel burns without progress. Vehicles are abandoned when they can no longer be recovered under fire. Crews destroy what they cannot save. The armored spearheads still fight when they meet resistance, but they do so as fragments, not as a unified force. The offensive shape dissolves under pressure applied from above and ahead. The verdict arrives without ceremony. The time lost earlier cannot be recovered. No maneuver, no burst of effort can reclaim it. The weather has shifted the balance irreversibly. What began as an attempt to outrun the enemy has become a struggle to survive observation. As Allied aircraft continue to range freely over the Ardennes, the offensive reaches its highest point not in distance gained, but in clarity revealed. The gamble has been called. And in the widening blue of the winter sky, the answer is already written. German spearheads continue to fight with determination when they meet the enemy. In villages and along ridges, crews engage, maneuver, and inflict losses. Tactically, many of these encounters are hard-fought and competent. Strategically, they lead nowhere. Victories cannot be translated into momentum because momentum is no longer available. Fuel shortages deepen as the days pass. What remains is reserved for movement that must occur, not movement that might succeed. Recovery operations become impossible under air threat and artillery fire. Disabled vehicles are stripped of usable parts, then abandoned or destroyed. Each wreck left behind marks a decision forced by circumstance, not choice. Orders begin to change in tone and intent. Advance becomes hold. Hold becomes withdraw. Each transition arrives later than it should, delayed by communication strained by distance, congestion, and uncertainty. Units receive instructions that no longer match the situation on the ground. Clarity erodes along with control. The column that once imagined itself a spear now becomes a liability. Stranded steel blocks roads. Burnt-out hulks restrict movement for those still capable of it. What was meant to break through enemy lines now obstructs its own retreat. The forest roads that promised concealment now trap what remains. Units begin peeling away where they can. Small groups disengage, seeking routes that remain passable, abandoning cohesion to preserve survival. Engineers destroy bridges behind them, not to deny the enemy advance, but to slow pursuit. The goal narrows from success to extraction. In every abandoned vehicle, the original problem echoes. Not as a single cause, but as a pattern. The tiny maintenance slip did not bring the front down by itself. It joined a chain of delays, each compounding the next, until structure gave way. What collapses here is not courage, but schedule. The turning point is complete. The offensive has lost its identity as an offensive. What remains is a retreat conducted under pressure, shaped by terrain, weather, and an enemy now fully engaged. The Ardennes, which once promised surprise and motion, now offers only routes of escape. As German forces pull back through the same narrow roads they fought to advance along, the story of the breakthrough closes not with a decisive blow, but with accumulation, with the quiet, relentless weight of minutes lost and never recovered. Afterward, the record reduces the offensive to numbers. Tanks lost. Trucks burned. Men killed, wounded, missing. Columns in reports fill with totals that suggest scale, but conceal sequence. They describe what was destroyed, not how the destruction began. The true origin of failure is harder to quantify because it unfolded in minutes, not explosions. Mechanics remember something more specific. A moment of recognition, often recalled with uncomfortable clarity. A fitting that should have been tightened again. A line that felt wrong under the fingers. A filter that did not seat as cleanly as it should have. At the time, it seemed minor. Later, it becomes the point where a traffic jam began, where motion turned into waiting. Commanders remember a broader truth. They remember that the plan could not tolerate delay. That every timetable was drawn with confidence but without margin. They also know that delays were unavoidable. Machines fail. Roads clog. Weather interferes. The contradiction is quiet but decisive. They could not afford what they could not prevent. The Allies remember something different. For them, the Ardennes becomes proof that German breakthrough power is no longer absolute. That armoured thrusts, once feared for their inevitability, can be slowed, shaped, and ultimately defeated if time is gained early enough. The lesson is not about heroism alone, but about control of space, of tempo, of response. Strategically, the cost is severe. The failed offensive consumes fuel reserves Germany cannot replenish. Trained crews are lost, captured, or dispersed. Vehicles abandoned in the Ardennes are not replaced. The effort accelerates an overall decline already underway, trading irreplaceable resources for a gamble that never reached its conditions for success. The Ardennes thus becomes a lesson in modern war's dependence on logistics. Not as an abstract concept, but as lived reality. Maintenance, supply, recovery, and scheduling, disciplines rarely celebrated, prove as decisive as tactics and bravery. The front line is shaped long before it is reached. As consequence settles, the legend of the battle often emphasizes courage under fire, dramatic defenses, and desperate attacks. All of these are real. But beneath them lies a quieter determinant. The outcome is decided not only by who fights harder, but by whose machines continue to move. In the end, the story resolves not around a single catastrophic mistake, but around accumulation. Of minutes lost. Of repairs delayed. Of fuel burned while waiting. In the Ardennes, history turns on details small enough to fit in a workshop and powerful enough to decide the fate of an offensive. By late 1944, Germany is short of the things maintenance requires most. Spare parts are limited or improvised. Trained mechanics are fewer with each passing month, pulled into combat units or lost to attrition. Time, always the first casualty of a desperate war, is almost non-existent. Machines still demand care, but the system can no longer provide it consistently. Vehicles are overused and underserviced, driven far beyond their intended life cycles. Maintenance intervals are extended, then quietly abandoned. Components meant to be replaced are cleaned, adjusted, and sent back into service. Winter exposes the cost of these compromises. Cold turns wear into failure, and failure into delay. Discipline remains. Crews follow orders. Mechanics work with determination and skill. But discipline cannot create spare parts, nor can it slow the clock. The system is no longer balanced. It demands precision from men and machines that have already been pushed past sustainable limits. The offensive itself reflects this imbalance. It demands flawless execution, perfect timing, perfect coordination, perfect mechanical performance. The plan assumes that machinery will behave as if it were operating under ideal conditions. This assumption is not born of ignorance, but of necessity. Without perfection, the plan has no margin. In this environment, the slip is not an anomaly. It is expected. A rushed inspection. A misjudged adjustment. A fitting left just short of secure. These are not personal failures. They are systemic symptoms of exhaustion spreading through every layer of the war effort. The moral irony is restrained but clear. The Reich bets its future on machines it can no longer properly sustain. Armor and mobility are expected to deliver salvation, while the quiet disciplines that make them reliable, repair, supply, routine, have been eroded by years of overreach. The legacy is enduring. Industrial war punishes those who neglect the invisible crafts. Not immediately, and not dramatically, but relentlessly. In the Ardennes, the collapse does not begin with defeat in battle. It begins with a gradual loss of the capacity to keep machines whole, and with it, the ability to keep plans intact. It begins where it began before. Engines coughing in the cold. Mechanics working under dim light, breath visible, tools cold to the touch. The Ardennes offensive does not open with gunfire or orders shouted across a map. It opens with maintenance, with the simple, essential act of preparing machines to move. In that quiet moment, before the forest stirs, the fate of the operation is already being negotiated. Seen this way, the story changes shape. The breakthrough does not die first in battle. It dies first in the timetable. Long before the bridges are lost or the skies clear, time begins slipping away in small, almost invisible increments. Minutes lost to cold starts. Minutes lost to repairs. Minutes lost to waiting. Each delay seems survivable. Together, they become decisive. The Ardennes offensive is revealed as a gamble without margin. It demands perfection from the first kilometre onward. Every delay becomes a crack. Every crack widens under pressure. There is no reserve of time to draw from, no slack in the system to absorb friction. Once momentum falters, the plan offers no mechanism to restore it. The Allies do not need to invent the choke point. They inherit it. The Germans carry it with them inside their own logistics, inside narrow roads, fuel shortages, overworked machines, and exhausted maintenance crews. What appears later as resistance is often only reaction to opportunity. Time, once lost, becomes an Allied weapon. Courage is present throughout the story. Crews fight their vehicles forward. Mechanics work in impossible conditions. Units engage and hold ground under fire. None of this is absent. But courage has limits. Courage cannot tow a stalled column. Courage cannot clear a traffic jam. Courage cannot restore minutes that have already passed. This is the quiet verdict of industrial war. Victory no longer belongs solely to those who fight hardest at the front. It belongs equally to those who sustain movement behind it. Maintenance, supply, scheduling, these are not supporting details. They are the structure on which everything else depends. When they fail, no amount of bravery can compensate. In the Ardennes, the Germans wager their future on speed and shock. They assume that machines will perform as required, that delays will be rare, and that winter can be managed. What they discover instead is that systems already strained cannot be pushed into perfection by belief alone. The machines do not rebel. They simply obey physics. The lesson is neither dramatic nor comforting. Modern war rewards the invisible disciplines as much as the visible ones. The outcome is shaped as much by workshops as by battlefields, by routines as by tactics. When those quiet crafts are neglected or overwhelmed, the consequences arrive later, far from the original oversight, and with far greater force. In the end, the Ardennes offensive is remembered for its ferocity, its weather, and its scale. But beneath the legend lies a smaller truth. The breakthrough did not fail because the enemy was invincible. It failed because time was unforgiving. And time was lost first not in combat, but in maintenance. They tried to break the Allied line, yet a tiny maintenance slip broke their momentum first.